All right, so we'll make the statement that we are meeting remotely because of the governor's executive order and COVID-19. There is no physical location, but the meeting is on Zoom, and it will be recorded and available for the public. First thing on the agenda item is to approve the June 11th minutes that Steve put together for us. Thank you, Steve. And I didn't have any questions on anything. Good there.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
Right. So do we need to go do the roll call?
Yeah, it's up to you. I mean, it's just, we just want to make sure we have minutes for people.
Okay, not a formal. So the second thing was we were going to follow up on the June 11th meeting. It looks like we have a participant, so that's something's working out there, Steve.
Yeah, it makes me feel better.
Dean Lightfoot is joining us.
I shared the screen, Rob.
Say that again.
I shared the screen. Hopefully, can
Yep.
you guys see it? So.
Yes, yes. So just real quick, I think one of the things the last meeting, the primary thing that we talked about was the focus of the committee being on education, which is today is a good example of that. Our methods of reporting and oversight in that just providing direction beforehand as the budgeting process begins and moves along. So today, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, I think, and Steve, and talk about Hudson's financial management system, how they do things and how we do things, and where we might go from here.
Sure. So I did contact, well, she retired as of June 30th, but I did contact her right after our meeting, Karen Burnell, who was the Hudson School District Business Administrator. She said that their financial system that they use is a Munis product, and a lot of their reports that they get, to include the budget report that some people have brought up before, is done using Crystal reports. And they've paid for those reports to be created, kind of like us. So if we look at us now, we use eFinance, which is a SunGard product, and it's version 19.4. And instead of using crystals, we actually have Cognos that we can do to create reports. We do create some ourselves, but when they get really involved, I don't know enough on Cognos, and nor does the tech department to do it. So like for instance, the programmatic budget that was a request of the budget committee a couple years ago, that the district did pay to have contracted through SunGard around $6,000, I believe. And so since September 20th, I believe, I've been trying to get SunGard to give me a quote on how much it would be to take that report, because it's created in budget land, I'll just call it. So it's only gonna give you what is the approved budget, and actually have it that it can be run at any time with expenses, with actual live data. And it still is not a settled item, that it actually has been that they've said, okay, this is what it is. It is in my inbox, so I periodically email them again, asking for an update, asking them for an update. They say they'll check on it. They don't get back to me, and then I you know, rattle some chains again. But I think at this point, either I'm going to try to get someone higher up, which I don't know who that would be, or potentially get Steve involved, because it has been something that we're looking for a quote. We understand that it's something that isn't for free, but I can't even get anybody to answer me back other than I'm checking on that for you.
Wow.
So they took $6,000 and they aren't providing any customer support.
No, they gave us the original programmatic budget for budget development. But
Correct.
now we're trying to do it on the expense side, which was another request. We budgeted and we're trying to, we have some money in our budget for that. And we want to, we were trying to get the exact dollar and bring it to the board of this committee to implement.
Right. So just to, what I did is I did encumber a PO, not knowing how much we were going to have to do. My fear was if we didn't do it before June 30th, I know it's something I've been requesting since September 20th, that I didn't want us to get in a situation next year to not have funds that were in the budget for the purpose of doing Cognos reports, especially with potentially there even to be another item that might be of interest in the future for this year, which might be some different kind of budget creation report. You know, so my fear
Right.
was, so at this point, there is an encumbrance carrying over into 2021 for when we do have a number for the board to decide whether to do or not.
Do
So-
you? Oh, sorry, Rob.
Michelle, what would be, I think that there's a lot of talk about Hudson, and I've spent, over the last couple of weeks looking at some of their individual reports. And some of it is very helpful and clear, and some of it is way too much. I don't think, as I said the other night, I don't think we need to know how much we're spending on Frisbee discs. So would it be helpful if Norm and I spent some time and really said, okay, this is what we've reviewed, and this is what we think would be a good thing for us to have moving forward into the next budget season?
Yes, because I think the sooner the better, especially if there's more data than potentially, which will, I'm kind of stepping ahead a little bit, but kind of like who puts the data in. If it's wanted in a certain way, that's going to be then something that's going to be in a report that's going to go to greater good, then we probably would want to get that information to the people that are putting it in sooner than later, so that it's not, after fact trying to update their data.
Rob, would it also make sense to also put out a soft survey of what exactly people are looking for, per se, in the presentation? What are they looking for? I mean, I think it's great that you and I, would look at that, but maybe to get a general consensus of what exactly people are looking for, from this specific, board in regards to the budget process. We hear from multiple people, they want line by line, they want this, they want that, but what part are they looking for us to zoom in on?
Right. And it would be a good idea. I just don't know if they would know what to tell us.
We'd have to come up with the survey, you and I, instead of playing that card all the time, with all due respect, tell us what you're looking for us to be able to put our homework to and put our thinking caps on. Because I'm open to anything, that makes sense. And also I'm very considerate of Steve and Michelle's time. I'm willing to put in the extra time to really share with this town, I guess a budget that works for them.
What we have heard pretty consistently is, as Rob alluded to, it's been multiple budgets, multiple years. It's been Hudson, right, Michelle? I mean, that's been, so those who've had real questions or requests about our work, that has been the district that's been brought up pretty consistently. So if you wanted to start there, or if you wanted to do more, but at least we do have that feedback that has been the model. And we've done some stuff, but we also have a different approach on some things, just because of sheer size and how to protect privacy regarding some health issue, healthcare and things like that. But so it's up to you. But I do think we've got enough feedback during the past budget process that at least has been the most common request.
So did you get a quote for the Hudson? I'm just curious. Were they able to give you an amount on on the
No,
on
no, because
Hudson?
I haven't even got an amount on what it would be to change our programmatic budget report that they created in the budget world into a live expenditure world. I haven't even got
Yeah.
a quote for that. So what I was planning on doing is once I had that, then I'd be, okay, then, you know, if we were looking at a more involved, and see, the problem is they're going to need to know what it is that we want, because that's how we had to do programmatic, right? Is I had to go
Yeah.
with them and tell them how we wanted the data to kind of look, so that then they could give us an idea of how much that would be based on what I was looking to take from. Because they're in tables. So, you know, it's pulling from different tables to get the data that you may want. Like an example is, so we have personnel budgeting, which is where I put the people and do the people. And then there's a button that gets pushed that the totals from each line goes into the actual account. Like, you know, let's just use kindergarten salaries. It doesn't say this teacher's this teacher's that, this teacher's this teacher's that. It just has a blank number, but it represents 4 FTEs. You know what I'm saying? So that's the other thing, is depending upon how involved they want it, or, you know, you guys and whoever is deciding this, it might be more or it could be less, because, you know, I'm thinking if it's going to be more about digging into the personnel, because, you know, we'll get into it a little bit later, but the budget is 80% salary and benefits. And so then when you look at that, and then you take, on top of that, you take transportation, which that's just a contract, right? So, I mean, we're not even talking about special ed, we're just talking about contract, which is over $500,000 plus, right? And then you look at debt, and then you look at food service and federal projects and other grants fund. You're looking at all those that I just mentioned are about $2 million. So that's on top of the 80%. You know what I mean? So when you really get down to the nitty gritties, there's not a lot of dollars. There's dollars, but in the general comparison, looking at the whole greater good of the budget, it's not a big percentage of what, like Rob said, are we really going to want to know how many pencils somebody, you know, or how many filters are we looking to purchase for, and quite honestly, we don't have it to that, we could get it, but we use other ways to budget for that. Like some of our things are like a 3-year average that we use for repair and maintenance, right? Because we don't know what's going to come up for repair and maintenance. So that we developed years ago. Actually, I think it was even before me, that it's going to be a 3-year average of actual expenses.
Do you know of any district that uses the upgrade SunGuard for the expenses that is currently out there?
Pelham does, Litchfield does. They're a different version, but it still would be a simple, like we were on the older version, but we switched to 19.4 so we could get student activity accounts on eFinance. Right now they're on our old legacy system. So in the near future, we're going to do that. So, but they're extremely similar. They're to the point that it's just a little bit of looks. It's the same steps you take and things like that. Also, there's a Hooksett, Auburn, Candia. That district, those districts have them. So I can look and see what they have. But again, we got a lot of Cognos reports for free from Pelham, because
Okay.
I'm you know,
He's your peep.
yeah, you know, you call them your peeps, right? So like the BA that used to be there in Pelham is now the exec director for New Hampshire ASBO. So I knew him, you know, when he was the BA, and now I know the new BA. So they just said, hey, we want to give our Cognos reports to Hopkinton, and we don't want them to have to go ahead and pay. So I'll look at those that they gave us that might be a little different than what we use. because we've actually, Steve and I have talked about this for a while. It's just we haven't had the time to really dig into the budget bulletin because it's great data and it's lots of data. And it gives, I think, a lot of what people are looking for, maybe not as far as like how much is Sally making and what are their benefits, but it gives you a lot of data. But, you know, I think a lot more people want visuals nowadays, potentially in a different format than, you know, the old school numbers. You know, maybe it's in grafting and, you know, there's all different kinds of things, but because we're kind of a small shop, we kind of just get in the mojo of doing the exact same thing, you know, as we've done in the past.
Why don't I suggest doing this, that I will go through what Hudson has on their website and filter it down to perhaps just reflecting on what people have been talking about for a long time, what best suits that. I'll run it by Norm and I'll run it by Steve, and we can chat about it at our next meeting and show some examples, and then we can maybe get some pricing.
Perfect.
Do you think in the meantime we should push a little bit more on the SunGuard upgraded version just to kind of maybe see where we are with that?
We can talk about reaching out.
Yeah, that way we're overlapping the time for that. So.
Oh yeah, and the good thing is I keep all my emails, so I have all the dates that I sent them. But yeah, so Steve and I'll work on that. The last thing was at the last school board meeting. It was asked about putting up our quarterly reports. So during that meeting, I had Matt go ahead and create a area on, it makes sense to be in the business department area where the monthly financials already are, as well as the audit. So Matt did that the next day, and I did the quarterly reports for, I think, a couple years, the day after that or something. So they're already up there.
And that's on the district website, Michelle?
Yep, and it's underneath the business department.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going there right now. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's yep. You go to business.
Yep.
And then on the right side, you'll see audit reports, monthly financials. Then there's quarterly financials.
Okay. Yep.
If you click on there, there's data in there. And I was talking to Steve about maybe moving for next year the budget to this area too, like keeping all the financial stuff in kind of like one wheelhouse, driving everybody to like the business department. A lot of districts have it that way, that they also have like, you know, an area underneath that for budget, and then have all that data too, so that you don't have to worry about where do I go for this versus that. And it's all related to financing, you know, finances.
We're supposed to have a new website coming too. So.
Right. But anyway, so that's at least some quarterly stuff on there for people to look at.
That's good. I think that'll be very helpful for folks who want to see some knit and grit. So.
And I think it's great. I'm looking at it right now. It's simple. If you don't understand it, talk to us. Let us explain it to you. That's why we're here. And you know, I'm going through right now, and of course I understand it because I'm used to it. But if you're not, reach out to us. We'll gladly explain it.
Right.
So thank you for putting that there, and Rob recommending it.
No problem. Yeah.
All right. I think next up, Steve, is you want to go over how we go through the budget process and some of the lingo here?
Sure. So just as we go through, I'll just talk a little bit about some principles and timeline, and we can talk about the board just directions. So one of our principles is site-based management, which means those closest to the implementation of the budget develop the budget. Like I don't develop the Maple Street School art budget. The art teacher who's in charge of implementing the budget develops the budget. And so we really have our teachers and our building administrators start from the ground up, and then it comes through. We also, and we try very hard to require a zero-based budget. What that means, we build up from zero. What we don't want is, oh, I ordered 10 Frisbee discs last year, so this year I order 10 Frisbee discs. Next year I'll order 10 Frisbee discs, and we'll go from there. What we want is, what is the program that you're developing, and how do we supply that program? And I want you to go look at your inventory. I still believe that we should do Frisbee golf at the high school. So I look at my inventory. Nope, this year I only need 5 because I had 5. And not just without reflection and purposeful deliberation, just keep ordering the same thing. So zero means you start from what you need. You don't start from last year. And there's, Michelle and I both sometimes going through, we can catch some people that have really just built it from last year, and we have to go back and really require a review. As Michelle already alluded to, we do for the maintenance and for some maintenance type expenditures and oil and gas and those, we do averages, right? So we look at trends, we don't take a spot in time. And Michelle can get to it if you want. We do a buying group, we have energy consultants, we do so that's how we do that, but we look at averages. And we are a mission and goal driven district. So what is necessary to accomplish the goals and fulfill the mission? And so when I present the budget, I always have, I do connect it to what we're trying to do at Harold, what we're trying to do at Maple, what we're trying to do at Middle, and what we're trying to do at high school, very philosophically based. It's not a just standalone budget. It's the budget that supports the mission goals and the mission and the district goals. And so one of the things that has happened sporadically, and it's something for this group to think about, is what kind of direction do you want to give in the front end of the budget development? For example, once the board looked at the tea leaves, looked at where we were and said, we want from the very beginning, Steve, we want all non-personnel related flat budget. And that direction was to the math department. They said, all right, you're going to be flat. So that was at the beginning of the process. It wasn't cut to get to flat. It was developed flat. So there's only once in my career as your superintendent where the chair of the board looked at me and said, Steve, we want you to present a budget that will fulfill our mission. Not just move our mission, but fulfill our mission. That was Matt Cairns, and that budget had a curriculum director. It had a social worker in it. And that was it. All around that, it's usually about slow growth and making progress towards. Only once in my, and I've been directly involved in developments of budgets, 6 as a principal, and this is 17 years. My first budget as a principal was a want-based budget. The superintendent said, Steve, what would you like to have at your school to develop a program? Was my first budget. Ever since then, it was a needs-based budget. They quickly said, Steve, we're only at needs. But so once was a want budget. My first one is principal, and all the rest have been needs-based, and only once when Matt Cairns really wanted to take a look at what would fulfill the mission of care. So as you think about it, it was very, very helpful at the start of a process to get direction from the board about where we want to get to. So just think about that.
Steve, I had a quick question about 3-year averages. What about when we have outlier years where things are particularly high or particularly low? Like this year, we're going to have some things that are low. Some years if the cost of heating oil goes up. How do we deal with?
Do you want to speak to that? I mean, we have looked at, I think we've done 5 on occasion, right? You and I have decided to go a little further.
I've done 5. I mean, I got to be quite honest. I don't know how we're going to do some of the things for budgeting for next. It's going to be difficult. What I mean by that is usually we look at a 3-year average for subs. It's like number of, people that we had to use for, you know what I mean? Right. Or repair and maintenance, we'll probably be okay with that. But what we do for fuel is we look at the usage of a 3-year. But yes, we will have to look at more of like a 5-year this year because it was kind of skewed. And then what I do is I go to the energy buying group and they give me what I should be using for the budget. And so, because usually 9 chances out of 10 when we're doing it, we are needing the values in October-ish. And we don't go out to bid until much later than that. A lot of times we go out to bid, if it's a really bad year, we've gone out to bid so that we can see if we can cut money out of the budget. And we've done that even so late as I think the public hearing night, right, Steve, of budget committee meetings.
Yeah.
Saying we just got the value, we want to cut our budget because we found out that fuel's only going to be X.
I guess I bring it up in the world of economics. There's something called trimmed mean PCE. And essentially what they do when they're calculating inflation is they throw out the high and they throw out the low. And they go and it gives you a more normative perspective as to what it might be.
No, thanks. I appreciate that.
I guess, we're talking about the budget process. When do we have that discussion in this committee where we're discussing maybe, I don't want to say changing, but maybe have a discussion about how we want to reevaluate it? When's that plan?
I'm about to hit a timeline. So September, we typically open the schools, right? So that's all the effort and energy in September. Once we hit October 1st, Michelle opens the budget development and the teachers start developing the budget October. So if you wanted to provide some direction, it really is before the October 1st number. If we want to get it to the teacher development piece, and that's my recommendation. So October is teachers work on the budget, send it to, by the end of October, administrators have looked at it. So teachers and building administrators, departments, that's what they look at. Now, November, it transitions to me. So that's when from director, student service director, technology, business administrator, building administrators, Michelle and I meet with all of them and we go through the budget. And they start the process of transitioning the budget in November from the building budget to the superintendent's budget. So that happens in November. And then in December, the transition is from the superintendent budget to the board budget. And what we really like, if we can, is, and if you want to move it, we can talk about timeline, but we'd like to have a budget adopted in December. It's becoming a little bit more of a habit now to go into that first meeting in January, which is more of a challenge just because it shortens the prep from that to the budget committee. But so October teachers and administrators, November superintendent, December I present to the board budget. We adopt hopefully in December, no later than the first meeting in January. Then it becomes a budget committee budget. And then we transition, we present to the budget committee and they own the budget committee after the public hearing in February. So basically the last 2 weeks of January, lately it's been because the board budget to the first 3 weeks in February, that's the transition from the superintendent budget to the budget committee budget, which is presented in March on the warrant because we are a municipal budget committee charter. So that's the number that goes on the warrant. So if you want, there's been some talk about starting earlier or starting it. It's hard to start in September because teachers are just getting a hold of kids. And if you wanted to squeeze October, Norm, to answer your question, we really have to start thinking about this in our next meeting, the timeline of the budget in August, if you want to make significant changes.
I'm sorry, Steve. No, I'll let you finish and I'll say.
Just like, I'm not trying to be a wise guy, but we've been dealing, so I started, the first look at the budget was the first week in November and we still haven't resolved it yet. So I've been doing budget November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, and it'll be in August, which of course is a little bit of an anomaly. Usually it's November and we end in March and then we start implementation of the budget with contracts. But go ahead, Norm, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Well, for me, and I've mentioned this a little bit to Rob, and just in passing, learning from my first budget experience, being on the board, one thing for me is, of course, giving you a sense of direction. But at the end of the day, we try to put forward our best budget for students while being respectful to all our taxpayers, with limited resources. But where I am concerned about is, where we give you direction, on a certain percentage, we start to discuss the initial increase with all the warrants. Because at the end of the day, that is where our community looks at saying, hey, you've got all these warrants that's going to produce this much of an increase. At what part of the budget process do we say, okay, we're going to manage this budget based on what potentially could happen with these warrants? With repair and maintenance, with special ed.
Yeah, I appreciate, so, and what the direction to teachers don't, and even building so the personnel budgeting, which is right 80% of the budget,
Yeah.
that's been really the superintendent working with. Like the board said non-personnel, like you can freeze supplies right at a level, but sometimes legally, right, there's concerns about not being able to hire staff or so we've heard like the budget committee wants you to hold to a 4% tax, and what we don't, tax caps, and there are some municipalities with a a charter or a referendum imposed tax cap. Those are very, very difficult because there are certain things. For example, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, we had 3 students appear on our doorstep with, 6-figure placements that it takes 2 budgets or 3 budgets to align them with the budget. If you capped it, then you are actually cutting the budget. Like, we've been through this in the last 2 months, right? You cut the budget for increases, mandatory increases, or things like that. So I hesitate to implement a cap on personnel or pieces like that. You could say no new program and only personnel required by regulatory statute. And that's perfectly, but you don't want to it'd be difficult to budget with a cap because there's so many variables that are outside of our control. I don't know if I was clear or not.
No, it's clear. I'm just trying to look at the end of the equation, because when we get through the whole budget process, at the end of the day, the taxpayer is looking at that. And if there's a way of us being able to communicate that to them, why it's this and why we reach these specific points in the budget process and make it a clear understanding, I think that's probably where maybe there'll be more of a compromise. Just something to think about.
And if the board believes they have to zero base supplies, extent that saves a lot of time, right? Then I have to cut down to 0 or cut. So we want to be efficient. But remember, as you do that for a couple of years, that is reducing program, because inflation goes up and you freeze it, then you are reducing the opportunity. You can do it for a year, but if you do that over time, it does impact the program. But that's and I think that's most schools. We're a little bit clearer in division by month, but I think this is most districts' process. Some are plus or minus. Kearsarge does their budget by August because they're a charter, so they finish their budget by August. Cities have a different budget timeline, and so, but for most town meetings like us, and obviously if we went to SB2, that changes the time. But we do.
Yeah, there's a lot of chat. The budget committee has talked a lot about projecting out a number of years, and our ability or the difficulty of doing that. And I would say that, for the overall budget, I get that. How able would you be able to do that for personnel?
I don't know. I'd have to check.
So we were when we went down to 860. We did a lot by attrition, right? So we're at 1,000 kids now. We've been up to 1,050. We were down to 860. During that time, there was some desire to, and there was some projections that had us dropping below 860. And so Michelle and I actually spent some time. We sat down and we used a formula that we've got. So if you have, for every 80 kids, so 80 kids at the high school take, so it was like 5 classes, and so that's 1.2 teachers, or so they take 6 classes. Every 80 kids, it was 1.2 teachers. You with me? Because most kids take 6 classes at the high school. So we use that as a projection, and for the secondary and the elementary, we use 20 in a classroom. So if we had a projection going down from 80 to 60-ish, we reduced by a fifth. By a full-time FTE. So 80 kids was 1.2 at the high school, and 20 kids was 1.0 at the elementary school. And we spent some time projecting, because that was a request of the budget committee. And I'm not trying to be a wise guy. That lasted 1 year. We gained 100 kids. That projection was gone, and now we're at 1050.
The problem with the 3-year projection is we never know, and that can oscillate within a given year. So
exactly.
We
when I
can't
was-
stick with projection. We can't stick with what we project because it's so variable, correct?
Exactly. And Rob, you may remember when I was principal once, we netted 50 kids at the high school over one summer.
Yeah.
Net, which means that's a lot of kids. And when you look, we're 6 grades. So it's like 7 kids a grade. That's a lot. But I remember that summer, and we actually had a whole ice cream social for all new kids and families. We did a whole bunch of work because we had so many kids. And that's a buster. Like if we did that now at the early elementary, got 50 kids, we'd be in trouble. There's not much room at the end. So that's my struggle. We're a small district. Like Nashua, when I was at Hollis Brookline, they had Nashua had like 30 geometry teachers. Because they had one high school back then.
Right.
And they had 30 geometry teachers every year. Because they just had so much scale that if you bumped up by 100 kids, it was only, it was 3 kids a class.
Right.
We're not like that. So it's hard to us project. We did try though. That was our 80 kids 1.2, 20 kids 1.0. And that was our factor going down or up when we projected.
So, and you and I have talked about this before, my thing is less about number of kids and more about programs. We're going to run certain courses. We're going to run certain electives. So at the middle high school, certainly not at Harold and Maple, does that make, if you go at it from that view, does that make projecting easier? That's
a good question. I haven't looked at it that way, Rob. I'd be happy to talk with Chris and Rebecca and even maybe bringing Corrine in for that, for her historical perspective. Not that Jeff, you know what I mean? We're going to run, let's just say 20 sections of singletons, and we're going to, you know what I mean? I haven't, in all fairness, we haven't, and I appreciate this, a programmatic driven budget versus an enrollment driven budget. I'm very much intrigued to do, but we have been, because especially during that time through attrition, as you know, right? We reduced staff through attrition. But I'd have to give that some space to reflect and consult with some people.
Yeah, I'd be curious from the guidance perspective, rather than it being student driven by choices, saying this is what's running. You know what I mean?
And I appreciate that, because one of the things we've in all my time, right? I know, I'm sorry, I've been here a long time. And Rob, you too. We have always run 7th and 8th grade as 4 sections. Always. We ran it when it was 68. We ran it when it was 105. Right? So when it was 68, we loved it, right? It was, the cafeteria was less, and it was, but when we didn't add when we had 105 kids graduate with that class, if you remember. And people came. I remember the families that came, add another grade, make it, because we had 26 in the class in 8th grade. But we haven't treated 6th grade with that same commitment, but we have always done that in 7th and 8th. That's we're going to run those sections come heck or high water, right? Because that's what we do. At the high school, and you probably, your memories from at 9th grade, we pretty much run 4. Sometimes we've ran 5s. I don't remember a time we've run 3s.
Never.
Right. So there we've run either 4 or 5s, but mostly 4s.
Right.
And then it goes from there. And I know.
Well, I think in terms of projecting, maybe thinking about program instead of numbers would be an interesting way to have a conversation.
And even if we decide programmatically, we're going to offer some every other year. Sometimes it's appropriate every other year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But you're going to run it.
Right.
So count it that way.
It make it from a kid perspective more predictable in terms of what they're going to take.
My sense is it would be a stabilizing, a movement. I don't know about projection. We'd stabilize. This is what we're going to offer. So it'd probably be less ebbs and flows. So maybe if you can project, we're projecting a stable number of sections, which is a stable cost.
Stable number of Ts, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And I am cognizant of the time, and I appreciate your desire.
Yep.
So from this takeaway,
So we got about 20 minutes, and I want to leave about 5 minutes in case, I know Jean is on, in case she has a question. So we got about 15 minutes left. What do you want to focus on, Steve? And then we'll push some of this on into August.
Yeah, I'm fine. If we can get to expenses, payroll, this stuff, we can leave. I think a good place to stop is state and federal funding. It's a nice division. We can talk about local. So if Michelle wants to run through from here, and then we'll see for the next 4, but I think we can, I'm comfortable stopping at state and federal. If you guys are, we can do that next time. It's an easy demarcation.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good to
You
me.
guys okay if we move to Michelle and just talk about the expense budget?
Yeah, but just one thing, and I think we've kind of talked about it before, but just so that others may not have been part of that conversation, but until we actually have a budget for FY21, we can't even start the process for FY22. Like literally, I can't roll anything over to create a new year. I can't do, I mean, there's obviously nothing posted yet because we don't have anything, but just, and I confirmed that with our software just to make sure it wasn't like I was missing something. I just wasn't aware of it. I actually emailed them, and I have it in an email that no, you can't move forward without having, you can't do multiple years budget at the same time. So, okay, now on to expenses. So just a little bit, I know we've all heard it before, but we are highly regulated. So we, federally, we go by GASB, which is Government Accounting Standards Board. We also have Department of Labor. So the federal government has a Department of Labor, but then when we get to the state, you're gonna also see Department of Labor because believe it or not, we also have Department of Labor of the state of New Hampshire. So there could be differences between those two. We also have Department of Revenue that we have to look at. And I didn't even put it on here, but really Department of Ed. So our accounting structure is by the Department of Ed. It's their handbook. So we don't get to pick and choose what accounts we want. We have to report on their reporting. It's called the DOE 25. And then DRA is an MS 25. And those all use the same functions and object areas. So there's really nothing you can do if you're doing it correctly. What I mean by that is following the handbooks that are given to us as business administrators. We also have New Hampshire retirement, which is underneath the state. So we have to comply with New Hampshire retirement rules about what's treated as something that's considered retirement, or how many hours does someone be, even if they're like a couple different positions, things like that. And we have House bills and Senate bills. So we have all of those agencies that we get information from. We also have school board policies. So we have DAF, which was recently done. Again, the administration of federal grants. And so we have to have that policy in order to have grants. We have DBJ, which is the transfer of appropriation. So if there is a $7,500 or more appropriation that needs to, so budget transfer that needs to get done, that comes to the school board, and that is an action item by the school board. Anything underneath that, I can do. A lot of the times, it wouldn't even get to that threshold, but it could be, well, they thought we were gonna have supplies, but because of what we're going through with remote learning, we need information access, which is like kind of like a online subscriber database, just to give a brief example. We also have district procedures. So I bet Rob remembers, it's called the Purple Memo, and I have added it to the drive as well. But that really guides what our procedures are for purchasing, that there has to be a PO in and approved before someone can go ahead and commit district, make a purchase to commit district funds. And all of those things were audited by our auditor. So our auditor looks at our purple memo, makes sure that we're complying with that. When they do the random sample that they pick, you know, to make sure that things are being done right, they make sure we're being complying with state and federal laws. Also, we get audited by New Hampshire Retirement System, believe it or not. We were audited a couple years ago. We had to make some changes based on some changes that they did. And then recently, we were actually asked to pull all kinds of information. I'm talking about in the last 3 weeks of data, because they were audited, and because we were audited and had changes during their time period that they were getting audited of. We were asked to pull even more data to provide with them. As well as our federal projects, we get audited for that. So that's just a little bit of how the expenses work on that. And I can answer any questions if there are any.
Lots of eyes paying attention.
Yeah, there
Many
really are.
categories.
So we're going to talk now about payroll. I kind of talked about it a little bit already, but it is 80% of the budget. And one thing to make sure everybody is aware of, because this is not in every district, this doesn't happen this way, but it is here, that every contract of employment is approved by the school board. So other districts have the superintendent as the one that can approve it, and it doesn't go to the level of the school board. But that's just kind of like for those that might really not understand about that. That might be something very important that they didn't realize, that actually every contract does go to the school board.
And every change in contract, if we've changed a contract by a 10th, and that's transparent, board action, we say why and what it is.
Exactly. Yep.
So that, and including every Schedule B contract, which other districts don't do, just so you know.
So just, and I know just Schedule B for folks are those additional tasks that teachers take on, coaching clubs, all of those kinds of things.
Thank you for the translation.
Exactly.
Sorry about that.
You bet.
So another thing to hopefully set some people at ease, because I know when I first got here 16 years ago, it wasn't like this. When I got here 16 years ago, actually payroll was being done by one person and nobody was reviewing it. So heaven forbid if an error was made, you know, and that's not good practice. That's not, number one, good internal controls, but that's not fair to the employee that was made to have to, you know, have everything on them. So what I did is I made sure the auditor felt that that was something that I should be reviewing. I really felt that that was big enough that it actually should be, that somebody isn't just doing it and that I be the one to review it. Because I could put it on the HR accounting assistant, but really that is such a big part of it that she only does it if I'm on vacation or if I'm like not in the office. So there are checks and balances there. It's not just one person doing it solo. We do utilize online timesheets for a lot, probably 95% of our hourly people. So before it used to be paper, and now it's all done online. So we do have that record keeping. But there is a requirement of the state that we have to use a template for them if we're having an employee that is either partially paid for by the grant or all paid for by the grant. So there are some papers, but really that's just for the people that are underneath getting paid by a grant. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any on that.
Good.
Okay.
Just one quick comment. Are we, Rob, you mentioned the last board meeting about a notation on new hires. Is that still something you want to kind of still have as a recommendation, that when we approve a contract, we have like a notation on there for like the year? And
Yeah, that's my plan, is to, in board notes, to put step and track.
Okay.
All nominees, all teacher nominees. Yep, I put that in my notes to provide that in the
To us,
Discord.
okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And Norm, just, in terms of, my view there as it relates to this committee is, obviously the superintendent needs a lot of leeway to hire folks given the whole spectrum of things. But, do we at some point say this is the acceptable range? And if you're going to go outside of that range, then the board needs a good explanation as to why, because it can be a lot of money over time.
I agree with you 100%. It shows a good effort by Steve. So, yeah.
That's been our practice. I have not necessarily full board. I will call the board chair and vice chair if there is a significant one and make the case. And if I can't make the case, but so there is that practice is standard for us. But yes, happy to make the notation about step and track for new hires on board notes.
Steve, it might be a good idea for the whole board to get a sense as to when a job opens up, how many applicants are we getting? Like things have changed a lot depending upon, I haven't done an interview process in a while, but it's not 40 and 50 usually. And
right.
So just a sense as to how many applicants came through the pool and how many we actually decided we wanted to interview. That might be good information just for some context.
Sure. And I think I provided that for all the district hires for Manny's. I think that was the questions. I think
Yeah.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, the next thing is, purchase order requests. So just a little bit of information for people. So it gets entered usually by either a department head or an office manager, and then it gets approved by the administrator of that area. And then on top of that, the HR accounting assistant as well as myself review it to make sure that the proper accounts are used and that it looks like it's an item that we really should be purchasing before it actually gets turned into a purchase order. And then once it's turned into a purchase order, then they are given that purchase order and are then told that they can go ahead and make the purchase. Steve is involved, the superintendent is involved when we're in a budget freeze. Or quite honestly, I've had, sometimes not tons in my time here, but sometimes I have to come to him and say, hey, I don't feel real good about this. I don't think it's really something that, we should be doing. And so I go to him and talk to him about it. Because certainly that would not be what I would want to do is obligate the district for something that I just didn't feel comfortable with. I would want to get more approval than me.
Everybody okay?
Yep.
So on the revenue now, so we, again, believe it or not, there are some federal and state laws we have to comply with regarding that, as well as school board policies. So we have 2 school board policies that I feel are underneath the realm of revenue. One is obvious, it's DFA, which is investment. So for people, if they want to go and take a look, the nitty gritty of it is we really don't have a lot of opportunity for investing our funds because it has to be liquid and it has to be, safeguarded pretty good because it's taxpayers' dollars. So it's not like we can go out and get mutual funds or, different things like that. We're pretty, and it has to be collateralized. Another one that I feel falls underneath revenue is DIA, which is fund balance policy. Because again, fund balance turns into revenue in some cases. The unspent does. So that's another item. In the support material folder, there is the July 2nd revenue sheet that the board saw at our last school board meeting with the budget that now is one for consideration.
And I think that is a good place to stop, Rob and Norm and Michelle, just because we go to state funding and federal funding. We can pick that up next month, if that works for both of you.
Oh, it does.
That's fine. See if let's see if anybody in attending, or I should say if Jean Lightfoot has a question. She does. All right. Steve, can you do your magic?
I bumped her over.
All right.
Hi,
Jean.
Jean Lightfoot, 186 Deer Path, Kentucky. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for all this, for all your detailed work on this. I really appreciate it, and I think a lot of other people do too. This is the kind of thing that I think you're on the right track anyway, Norman, Rob, and Steve, and Michelle. I'm one that really agrees with the programmatic budget, and I haven't looked at the Hudson one, so I don't know what they do, but I know what I always had in mind was how much, including salaries, do we spend for, like, in the math department or in the social studies? And I don't know if I haven't even looked at the budget lately to see if it's broken out that way, but that's the kind of thing that I was kind of interested in more than just, okay, our total salaries are 80% of the budget, so there's nothing we can do with that. I mean, that doesn't really help, isn't a lot of help. So anyway, thanks a lot for all you're doing and for being so open about it. I really appreciate it.
Jean, let me just clarify that a little bit, what I was suggesting to Steve when I talked about programmatic. So typically what happens is, and Steve, you can cut me off or throw something at me when I go off base here. Students start signing up for classes, and a lot of what ends up running is driven by the number of kids that sign up. So there's a lot of fluctuation that can occur during that time period. And it creates unpredictability in terms of the budget. But if we were to say, this is our academic program, we know that we're always going to run this many sections of a certain course, or this elective will be offered every other semester or twice a year, then things become a lot more predictive financially, and there's a strong academic side to that in terms of taking away some of the anxiety about whether or not a course is going to run or not run, both for kids and for teachers.
Right.
Building that into, what it does cost to run a department. So does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I don't like, I feel like Rob and I have had some conversation about this whole issue before, but I feel like it's better to offer more detail than less, and then give some summary reports. Yeah, because some people just want the summaries, but give all the detail, because we're not all stupid, and there are people, you have accountants out here, you have financial people out here who are concerned about this and who would be able to understand and look at some of this stuff. So that's the only other thing I have to offer. But I really, again, thanks for everything you're doing, and for really stepping up.
Thanks, Jean.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Can I say one thing, Jean? That's just great information. And again, this kind of goes back to what I said originally. How can we get information from the community and what they're looking for? Of course, me and Rob are going to come up with something, but what is the best way to extract data from them so we can have some type of point for this committee where we can say, hey, this is what they're looking for. This is what, Jean made a really good point. What is the best path for us to extract data from our taxpayers? I mean, she made a great point of how we can approach things, but, I want to focus my energy on the majority of what they're looking to see. Is that through a survey? What's your thoughts on extracting that data from our community?
Yeah, I follow a lot of that stuff on the online, but I don't take part in it. I mean, I think that I'm just saying that I think there needs to be more detail than there has been offered to the public and put out there, and let people choose what they look at. But to say to them, okay, where do we cut, when they don't have all the detail to be able to say where to cut, then it's not, that isn't, that's not helping with the conversation. So, and also, yeah, I feel like, all I can say is what I would hope for. And I'm always one that is, always be, I always feel like for myself and, you know, in my job with the town, it's better to be as open as possible and not, you know, just let people decide the information they need. And
Thanks.
hopefully they'll give you, you know, at the next Zoom meetings or at the school board meeting, they'll talk more about it. But, you know, I can only give you my,
And they'll give us feedback, Gene. Don't worry about
yeah,
that.
I know. I know, they don't hold back, do they?
Thanks, Jean.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thanks for your afternoon.
You bet. So next meeting,
We'll do state funding, federal funding, and hopefully we'll have a look at some different forms or budget timeline. We'll talk about budget timeline in different ways, you know, that we can produce information.
all right, now I'll bring some stuff from Hudson, sort of boil it down. And Norm, I'll share that with you ahead of time, and Steve, maybe get a little office time in so we're more efficient
Perfect.
there as well.
Perfect.
What's the next date? Like, what do we have a schedule yet? I know we're on Thursdays here, but
Second Thursday, I think. Oh, but you said you might have to miss it.
so that's the, oh, I'm in July. Hang on.
So we have it the 13th of August. Does that work for you or no?
The second Thursday, right? Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm in Maine the week before then.
Yep. We moved this to the second Thursday now. Do you like 3:15 on the quarter hour or do you like 3? Because
Norm, what do you want to do? 3 is fine with me.
3:15 works well because I got out at 3, so
perfect.
that's
No,
okay.
Yep. No, I just wanted to make sure that we'll keep it at 3:15. That I didn't know if it was just the original one. 3:15 is it on the 13th?
Are our 2 board meetings in August, the 6th and the 20th?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
And
First-
Rob, I have a budget committee meeting on the 15th next week. Just to let
Oh.
you know,
Okay.
just to give you a heads up.
On the 15th?
Yep, 5:30.
All right, you and I can talk about that. Maybe I'll swing in as support.
Awesome.
Everybody
All
okay?
right. Thank you
All right.
guys very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good rest of
Take
the
care.
day.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.